The Second World War started when I was four years old. We lived between Canterbury and Dover in the Elam Valley, where many air battles took place. Life changed very dramatically. Food and clothes were rationed, and also petrol. The shops were empty as all manufacturing industries made war machinery. We were given ration books for food and clothing. My brother and I were given gas masks, which we carried everywhere. Mine had Mickey Mouse on the front because I was under 5 years old. Occasionally, a big van filled with gas would visit our school, and we would all march through the van to test our masks. We thought this was good fun. As there were many air raids, we were often kept in school for many hours after going home time because there was a risk that we might be bombed or hit by shrapnel. Shrapnel was the name given to pieces of metal flying through the air from falling bombs or shells. It was a common sight to see aeroplanes, German or British, circling down in flames. Whenever an attack by German bombers was imminent, a very loud siren would go off in an undulating tone. When the attack was over, the siren would go off in a long, monotonous tone to sound the all clear. I loved the second sound. It meant that we could go outside. Most of the time I was very scared, but I knew we had to win the war. At school there were big sacks hanging on the wall for waste paper. Everything went towards the war efforts. I learned to knit and make hundreds of little squares to make blankets for the soldiers. My mother knitted dozens of pairs of khaki socks for them. I have 2 certificates There's one, and there's the other, to thank me for my war efforts. We were told to save everything and never throw anything away. At school there were big sacks hanging on the wall for waste paper. Everything went towards the war efforts. When I was 18 and went to London to train to be a nurse, I had to take 2 little dishes with me, one for my sugar and the other for butter. We were allowed 2 ounces of each per week. Our house was in a wood. My father was a gamekeeper, but during the period of the war, he was a policeman. He couldn't go in the armed forces because he had poor eyesight, but all men had to leave their jobs if they were not vital and do something to combat the enemy. One day, the British Army moved into our house. We had to live in the kitchen. We had no electricity. Our toilet was outside, and our water came from a well. The soldiers used our front room as their office. The woods were swarming with soldiers. My brother and I made friends with them, and we reminded them of their own children. They would give us rides in their tanks. Every evening, a large van would bring their food, and my brother and I would hang around for a few soggy chips from their meals. They tasted delicious. Our wood was a good camouflage for the army. I felt safer when they were around. In our village, a large railway gun called the Bosch Buster was housed in a disused railway tunnel. It was designed to fire across the channel if there was an invasion. My brother and I used to help the soldiers when they cleaned the gun. One day, Winston Churchill came to inspect the gun. As he went past our village school, we were sent into the playground to watch him. We waved small Union flags to him as he drove by in an open-topped truck. He smiled and gave the V for Victory sign. We felt very proud. During the war, every home had a shelter. If the siren sounded because of an impending air raid, we would immediately rush into the shelters. In London, people went to the underground stations. Sometimes we stayed in the shelter for many hours, and on one occasion I had to stay in the school shelter all night as the all clear had not sounded. There were two types of shelter. One, a dugout, which was a large underground hole in the ground for those people who had a garden, and two, an Anderson shelter, which was kept indoors. It had a large, heavy metal roof and wire sides. It was like an enormous cage. I don't know why, but both at home and at school we had both types of shelter. I hated being in them. It meant that there was an air raid taking place above. All our windows had to be blacked out at night so that not a chink of light could be seen. Any light would be a target for an enemy bomber. The war ended in 1945. Everyone joined in the celebrations in the village hall on May the 8th and 9th. It was called VE Day, meaning victory in Europe, because the German forces had surrendered. However, we were still at war with Japan, but this ended on August the 15th, 1945, and it was known as VJ Day. Again, more celebrations. For England, the war was very expensive, and although we won, the price was very heavy. Many young lives were taken, and the country was financially heavily in debt. Here is a picture of our gas mask case. And there's a picture of two ladies wearing the gas masks. And this was my prize at school because I wrote the best composition on the VE holiday. Thank you.
Press the stop it.